Well, welcome back, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed your lunch. I hope you've had the chance to stretch your legs, do a little bit of networking. Just a reminder that if you have missed any of our sessions today at the Cityscape Global Summit, make sure you download the Swap Card platform. All of our sessions are going to be available on the app, free to download and review, and you'll also be able to connect with a number of our delegates and speakers as well. So it's been a busy day so far here this morning. We took a look at Dubai's local real estate market. We focused on Expo 2020 Dubai and the incredible legacy project that's going to unfold here with District 2020. We talked a little bit about smart cities and what kind of technology needs to be implemented to be able to make them a reality. And we also took a look at prop tech with some really great practical advice about what we need to be thinking about if we're just entering the market, and some do's and don'ts of what to avoid. And this afternoon, we are focusing on the built environment. We've got an incredible team going to be looking at the future of architecture and the future of sustainability and what it really means for all of us. So our next town hall this afternoon, we're going to be talking about the future of design in terms of concept, construction and regulation. Now, rethinking the spaces in which we work, live and play is a key feature of a lot of the architectural thinking that's taking place post-pandemic, including how architecture and urban design can act to build resilience, act on the role of urban design, and be able to adapt and think about how the built environment is really going to be used. We've got an incredible lineup of speakers this afternoon. We are very honoured that none other than Sir David Adjaye, OBE founder and principal at Adjaye Associates from the United Kingdom, is going to be joining us. Really, I feel like he almost doesn't need an introduction, but a few important points to highlight. He is responsible as one of the most influential architects of our time for some of the most inspiring projects that the modern world has seen, from Oslo's Nobel Peace Centre to the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. Locally, he's also been heavily involved in projects creating the Africa Institute in Sharjah and recently the Abrahamic Family House in Abu Dhabi. Now, this is an incredible world-first project with a mosque, a church and a synagogue at the site. Now, just a few weeks ago, he submitted a fascinating proposal to New York to be able to create an upside-down skyscraper. He's won a host of awards all over the world. In 2017, he was knighted by the British Queen. And he counts people like former US President Barack Obama and Bono as fans of his work, just to name a few. We really are honoured that he could join us today. Please welcome Sir David Adjaye. And he's going to be joined by some other incredible speakers this afternoon. We are really pleased. We're going to be starting with a bit of a Q&A with Sir David and then moving on to some of our other speakers as well. Please welcome another incredible architect, Stefan de Koning. He is an architect and a partner at MVRDV from the Netherlands. Now, he's had quite a broad design background that includes both interior architecture as well as exterior. He's worked on some really exciting projects all over the world, including Gyre in Tokyo, Future Towers, Puri 88, and the China Comic and Animation Museum. He's been leading some incredible projects in places like Asia, China, and some really exciting things we're going to be chatting about this afternoon. Please welcome Stefan. We are also delighted to welcome Kourosh. He's the design director of LWK+PARTNERS. Now, he's very familiar with this part of the world. He's had more than 2.5 decades of experience in delivering complex architecture projects here in the Middle East, as well as Asia and the UK. And spent 15 years in the capacity of a design and team leader. He's worked on a number of really exciting mixed residential, mixed-use developments, as well as retail as well. And he's familiar with all the stages of design and construction. Please welcome Kourosh to the stage. And we're also very pleased to welcome one of the cool kids in architecture today, Dicky Lewis, the Director of Global Design Leader at White Red Architects in the United Kingdom. Now, he co-founded White Red Architects back in 2014 and working on some major large-scale projects in London, working on a whole variety of the conception of cities, such as 425 Park Avenue office in New York, through to the delivery and technical design of a major airport in Panama. He counts clients such as Google. I think he redid the office in London a couple of years ago and has got some really exciting ideas about the future of architecture. Please welcome Dicky Lewis to the stage. And we're also very pleased to be welcoming virtually Marco Abdallah. Now, he's the Head of Engineering and Sustainability for Drees Sommer UK. He's going to be joining us online in a little while. Now, he is a very passionate engineer with a strong focus on sustainability and innovation. He's done a lot of work with the UK government as they're targeting net zero emissions. He's been in London for the last couple of years and really helping the UK team drive future topics like the circular economy, cradle to cradle, and customize smart buildings. So a very big thank you to all of our speakers for joining us. Well, thank you so much for making time for us today. So David, if I can start with you, if you don't mind. Your work has been described as one with fearless intellect and elegance. How would you describe your style? And do you set out with a goal to achieve something each time, or does it naturally unfold?
Thank you. So the work of Adjaye Associates was really founded to try and respond to a way of working on the planet that really started to really acknowledge the histories and narratives and the geographies of places as a foundational starting point. It was really set up as a way to counter discourse in architecture, especially in the 90s, which was about signature and style and about a way of producing a pattern, a way of architecture looking a certain way. And I found that really just logically not holding too much, holding ground for me. So really, in a way, Adjaye Associates sought to try and find a way of producing a practice that would work internationally, but that would dig into the deep histories of places and of people. So places, really thinking about the way in which land works and land histories and civilizations that have kind of come from those places, as well as the modern era, as ways to imagine possible new futures.
You know, I love the fact that when you are designing different projects, you talked about taking in the idea of geography, of culture, and climate. How heavily was that influenced by the fact you obviously were the son of a diplomat? I'm sure you saw more than your fair share of countries at a young age. How much of an influence has that been in your later years as a world award-winning architect?
I mean, I don't know exactly what happens in your mind as you do these things, but definitely I can say that having a childhood where I moved around the world at a very early age made me very aware of the differences of different people around the world. And so I think I kind of grew up thinking of a kind of planet of difference that all kind of contributes to our common humanity rather than a sort of national idea or a local idea. So, you know, I think indirectly, probably it's been part of it, but I think it's also my nature.
What inspires you? We can see some of your beautiful projects behind us here. But you know, when you're looking at the creative process, what is it that inspires you?
You know, I'm always trying to find things that are not obvious. I'm very interested in looking at, you know, an English word called ruse, the things that seem tangential to the everyday canon of what's important to a place. I try to avoid cliches and stereotypes. I think we have too much stereotype and cliche in the world, and I think that it's the job of an architect and a designer to find things that are actually not in the mainstream of a cliche, but actually are part of the profound way in which societies organize themselves, and the way in which the vast majority of society sometimes sees itself, and to bring that into the business of form making, which is, you know, the power that we have as architects and city makers. We are able to translate ideas that are happening in society and to kind of sieve through and bring into form really important ways in which we're thinking about our lives, the way we want to think about our lives, the way we want to think about our futures.
I want to ask you about some of the projects that you've been most inspired at, but of course we've got, one of the incredible projects that you're creating here in the UAE, the Abrahamic Family House in Abu Dhabi. As I was mentioning earlier, for the first time we have a church, a synagogue and a mosque. So tell me a little bit about creating this beautiful project.
This was a wonderful competition that was held 2 years ago that we won, and it's my first major project in the UAE. And for me, it was just a really important discussion to be had where we're in the UAE, and I felt that it was just an incredible decision by the royal family, by the foundation that was set up to do this, which includes the Pope, the head Imam, and the head rabbi, to come together and really to understand that the religions that somehow seem in our general worlds as being opposite are actually have a common root and faith. And I sort of felt that this was a very compelling idea that our world needs to be talking about, and that architecture should make form to accelerate that conversation about using architecture no longer to make difference, but to find similarities. So for me, it was to reverse a tradition of architecture where everybody's trying to make their unique symbol for the same God, but to actually find a way to make a symbol that starts to talk about the unifying ideas behind this notion of the monotheistic religions.
And I love this idea where you've talked about, the role of architecture should be about uniting cities. You've warned previously about some of the dangers that can happen when we're designing, rich projects for the rich, and it's, the great divide between those who have and those who have not is certainly only dividing around the world today, and that's why you're involved in a variety of projects. So, what are some of the biggest issues there? I know you've been involved in, I think, doing 100 hospitals in Ghana as well. Tell me about some of those projects, because I think sometimes, when we have these incredible world-famous architects, the projects you create are spectacular, but the impact on the everyday person, are maybe the ones who don't get to enjoy it.
Yeah, I think that is also a very important issue in the world that we're making, especially with the way in which global capital works. I sort of returned recently back to Ghana. I've sort of set up an office there. And one of the kind of big issues, especially during this COVID scenario, is to understand the failings of the medical infrastructure. And yes, there are lots of hospital architects that could come in and do it, but what we wanted to do was to work with the government to make a very affordable district hospital model. And we worked with them analyzing the terrain and the geography to set up a set of principles that can really use local rammed earth, mud construction, imports, solar technology, really look at training systems that could happen on the ground in terms of scaling up construction companies, and to make a very sort of low build but high tech infrastructure that can go to every part of the country. So it's probably one of the first times a sort of rollout of this scale is happening at the same time, and the lessons of it is that we're able to really use that rollout to kind of deal with the metrics of buildability, sustainability, the ecology, but also to understand how this can create an impact in the communities that it will go to, because it's going to be within 2.5 years, each district will have one of these. And for us, the issue was also to see if we could move the hospital beyond just being a medical technical box like an iPhone to being a social center, because this is going to be in a village or a rural community, and what is the point of a kind of ship landing that is disconnected from its community? So this idea of turning them into places where there are gardens and courtyards that can allow the community to engage with this infrastructure, and where the scale is also sympathetic to most of the kind of constructions that are around, was very important in the way we analyzed it.
I mean, it's an incredible design. We can see some of the photos here. What were some of the challenges involved? You mentioned using some of these smart tech. What are some of the challenges in bringing this high tech to places like Ghana, to some of the less wealthy nations that, quite rightly should have access to it, but just so often do not?
Yeah, I mean, some of the big challenges are, a kind of inefficient energy system. So what's I think interesting and going to be interesting about developing countries that are intelligent in their the way in which they use the small pots of money they have is that, for instance, we worked out that with the amount of roofs that we had, we could generate enough backup energy for each of these hospitals to have their own backup power. So we didn't have to be on the grid. We're sort of using the architecture to create a kind of energy pool that allows for a hospital to work for a certain amount of time that's stipulated by the Ministry of Health, even if there's a power blackout. So things like this, which are real issues in developing countries, not having a kind of consistent power base, were things that were really critical into thinking about this. You're going to import scanning machines, things for pregnancy and natal issues, and what's the point if the machines don't work? So working out how these hospitals can operate without the sort of economic sort of engine has been the real sort of back of house, I would say, real technology of what these things are about.
I think it's something, we were speaking with Siemens Energy a little bit earlier, and they were talking about, the focus now needs to be on technology with a purpose. So David, you've worked on so many incredible projects all over the world. I'm sure you don't have a favorite, but what are some of the real standouts for you? Are they the ones with the greatest challenges that you managed to overcome, or is it the ones that make the biggest impact on the community?
I mean, for me, impact is how you judge architecture. The best architecture serves the greatest sort of part of our society and gives the most. So, all projects have their value. Some projects which are maybe not so public, maybe have a kind of research sort of agenda to them or push certain technologies within controlled environments. But generally, for me, a really successful piece of architecture is one that has a kind of transformatory, changing perception amongst our society about how we should be in the world. If the architecture can support that, I think that, it's done an incredible job.
I'm going to bring the rest of our esteemed speakers in. So David, thank you so much for your comments there. Talking a lot about sustainability, some really interesting comments there from you, so David, about making sure that we're able to have practical use of these buildings and being energy efficient and being able to continually work. Stefano, I'd like to bring you in here. As an incredible leading architect, really fascinating, cutting-edge, sleek designer that you are well known for. How do you think, how important do you think sustainability is, and how is it changing the conversation and the design process for architects today? Are we now seeing architects look at the exterior facades of buildings differently now?
Well, sustainability is a big word for many things, I think. And you're referring here especially to materials of facades, if I recall. Yeah, with my greatest respect, David, how you do your geographically local applications of materials, this is something admirable, which obviously we all try to do. However, I see there can be quite harsh environments that can be both in Europe as here in the Emirates. And even here, if you look at local resources, you could say much is imported, for example. So how to deal with these kind of quests? So basically it comes down to basic logic think processes. As an architect, what you can do is you start, I think, with when you start with concept development, you start with placemaking, and you start with excitement and fun, and you start to understand who's your user and who's your client, and actually. And then you start to look at how do I build my building. You have structural principles that you apply. And that's where sustainability already starts. And I think the facade, very often, you see it in the renders, you see it in the images, and it speaks to you. But it's only a small part of what your building is. And now we have to all, as architects, follow, I think, innovative technologies as well. But very often they refer back to native historical inventions, even if it comes to glass. But also here you could think of materials like rammed earth, for example. And there's no more fun than experimenting with such applications. And this is also what we try to do. Now, in the fast, rapid building industry, I think it is also hard sometimes to be innovative, to make time for this. So as an architect, you use certain projects more as a living lab for material application, and other projects you more go with the industry. So it is always a balance in that sense.
And just for our audience to note, Stefan, we've just been showing some of your incredible projects here on the screen, really are beautiful, from the Pixel here in Abu Dhabi to a number of projects in the Netherlands, India and Asia as well. Kourosh, if I can bring you in here, because you've worked on some fascinating projects in the region and Asia as well. You know, right now you're involved in the incredible green bridge that's being created at Dubai Creek. I'd be interested to know, when it comes to sustainability, do you think it is a buzzword? Are clients really interested? Is it about the bottom line? Is it about sustainability? You know, is it a balance? What do you think?
I think nowadays no one is against sustainability and no one not wants to be sustainable. Yeah. But to understand and comprehend what this means can be difficult. Yeah, we talk about a green bridge, but how sustainable is the green bridge?
You're talking about my bridge?
Sorry?
So you're talking about my bridge? Yeah. Thank you for that.
No, we did it ourselves.
No, absolutely. No, look, I think that the sustainability is sort of been in the sort of consciousness, at least as legislative sort of jargon, maybe around, well, less than 20 years, in fact, when it actually became something that people needed to sort of adhere to, almost by regulations and so on. But once you actually look about the concept of it, i.e. being efficient with the energies, whether it was resources, human resources, materiality and so on, it goes way beyond that. Therefore, anything is to do with a sort of common sense approach to building, like a lot of the, for instance, rural vernacular architecture is in fact one of the most sort of profound forms of both minimal architecture and sustainable architecture, because they didn't have the luxury of the sort of the sumptuousness of taking things for granted. So therefore, sustainability is real, and it's been with human societies for a lot longer than it's been on the radar of architects as such. Is the Green Bridge sustainable? The Green Bridge, I don't know if you've seen it or not, it in fact was based on the very sort of essence of sustainability. What we wanted to do was to, because essentially originally the RTA wanted it to just be a bridge. And we thought, what if instead of being just a sort of a transition from A to B across the creek, it actually became a destination in its own right. So people could go there and sit and enjoy the magnificent views across the creek. So, and to do that, we had to sort of create an environment where it was passively cooled. And we employed a number of sort of, almost the concept of wind towers that you'll see in the region, perhaps in the north of the Gulf, for hundreds of years, where the warm air was channeled through and cooled to the lower floors. And we actually use that as sails. So whilst it looks fairly modern, but it actually based on the essence of some of the regional concepts of being able to live in without the cooling and so on. So it is in many ways an attempt to sort of keep things sustainable as possible.
Mm-hmm. And it's an interesting location for the project as well. I mean, Dubai Creek is, really where old Dubai meets new Dubai, and it's been such a pivotal reason behind Dubai's success in trading many decades ago. Marco, if I can bring you in here, you've been very patiently waiting for us online. You've done a lot of work with the UK government, working on net carbon zero projects. I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on sustainability, how it's changing the way that we create and design buildings today.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's a really great and important question, especially looking back to last week where I've been in Glasgow at the COP26, where we have discussed now for 1 week around topics like zero carbon. I think sustainability becomes now a real responsibility, especially for our generation. And I would say especially for architects. When we look, for example, into the zero carbon footprint of a building, 50% of carbon emissions are embodied carbon emissions related to materials. So that's half of the total footprint. And embodied carbon emissions are in the structure, in the facade, in the materials. So it really, really becomes now a huge task for the architect, not so much for the engineer anymore. It's really an architectural task to solve that. And what we see is that we really need to change the way how we design our buildings. We will also see that in the architecture. I'm strongly convinced we will see, of course, obviously more green. We will see different materials we use. Now we talk a lot about timber construction. So timber will be, I think, more important than it was in the past. Natural materials in general. And we will also see, I think, changes in the design principles. That means looking more into a circular economy, design for disassembly. At the end, we can, for example, deconstruct a building and we don't need to demolish it. And I think that solves also many other sustainability challenges we currently have, such as waste. 60% of waste is coming from buildings. So I think this entire material challenge will be part of the focus in the future.
And I think it's more important than ever to make sure that we're incorporating the sustainability in new designs. We heard yesterday from a number of speakers at Colliers, and they were saying that to bring current buildings in line with the COP26 qualifications is going to cost €7 trillion. And it's just such a huge expense when we're looking at something like that. Dicky, if I can bring in you here, I'd love to hear how you are designing for the future. I was mentioning earlier, a couple of years ago, you did the new Google office in London. You've got some big clients over there today, a lot of cool, trendy clients as well. And I think you bring a really young, fresh approach to it. So how is sustainability being incorporated in the way you create buildings today, construction materials that are changing and becoming a lot more sustainable?
Firstly,
is that working? Do you want mine? Try that one.
Is that working? Okay. Well, firstly, thank you for the introduction as the cool kids. I mean, that's a quite nice welcome. I don't consider myself that, but I know we are a young practice, and we're based in London, and that's kind of our playground for embodying our ideas. And as a young practice, we take the responsibility of encompassing these ideas into our architecture, and as some of our employees who we hire, who are younger graduates, are testing us on our sustainability agenda, and that's rightly so, and that's what we feel that our role is to also, some of the older, more established clients and institutions as well. And I think our main focus has been actually who we collaborate with. And it's interesting, we actually work with Marco on a couple of projects. And it's been really useful to have a different perspective on sustainability instead of just plowing through this net zero, carbon-free, everything has to be done at once. And for us, it's about what tangible steps we can take at a time. And we've been really focusing on that circular story. What is the brief of the project? How can we dismantle that later if needed to be? And it's been really important to be honest about if it's a co-working space, it's going to be a couple of years, then it's going to be dismantled or relocated. So, it's about being honest and not burying your head in the sand. There's lots going on with circular economy at the moment. For example, BMW have just released their completely circular car, and it's really exciting to see that the automotive industry is so forward-thinking. And we feel it our responsibility to kind of hold the torch for the construction industry on that element as well. And we wouldn't be able to do it just as architects on our own, and collaboration is the key, and working with people like Marco is what's helping us.
What do clients like Google or the Crown project that you're also involved in, what kind of things are they looking for today?
Well, it's interesting. Our project for Google was a refurbishment of one of their London office, and it was just before the pandemic. And their brief was that staff that were working remotely didn't feel part of the team, and when they came back into the office, they were confused about where to sit and where was their turf, basically. So it was our brief that we had to embody this flexibility and have these zones and welcome people to be part of the team and the important word of collaboration, which is what the office is for. So that brief was incredible because it's almost as if Google predicted the pandemic, and every single brief afterwards for office refurbishment has been that. And so for that, it's in mind is flexibility. So ensuring that things movable and interchangeable, and that it can last a long time. With the Crown Estate, people like the landed estates, where we're trying to work with them on things, is that they've got these beautiful heritage buildings in London. They've got 7 million square feet. We were doing the square feet, but 7 million square feet of real estate, and they've got the embodied carbon already. So for us, it's about making sure that the occupational carbon is at the forefront of what they're discussing, and to attract people to their co-working spaces. They can't just talk about air-conditioned meeting spaces anymore, because the generation that we're hiring in our team is the generation that are going to be taking their spaces, and what's their ESG credentials and agenda.
So looking towards the future then, there's also been a lot of talk about the 15-minute city. Earlier today we were talking about smart cities and how it's not just about technology, but it's about using tech to improve people's lives. So David, what are your thoughts on the 15-minute city? The idea that everything's going to be within about 15 minutes for each of us, not many cars, not a lot of vehicles, we're all going to have beautiful green spaces near us. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think if you can sort of look at the modernist project, the 20th century, as the sort of beginning of this idea of cities. And I think that when cities were being thought about, and we still have inherited quite a lot of that information from 100 years ago, nobody imagined that we'd be a planet of 8 billion people now, or approaching 8 billion people. And I think what's become clear is that the mono-designed city, the city of destinations and zones, has collapsed. We just simply cannot just keep making kilometers of infrastructure to service nodal sort of single-use points in a city. It's highly unsustainable and becomes more and more expensive as you have to upgrade and repair. So, we collapse back to the village, or the castle, as I call it, which is a place where the life of a community of people is completely thought through from all its scales, from having to deal with, highly political decisions right through to work or play or leisure. And I think that's what the basis of the 15-minute city is about, this idea of reducing, as we densify, and that's not going to stop, because look at the kind of leaps in biology that we've got going on, the nanotechnology. We're going to live even more, we're going to live longer, we're going to make more people, so we're going to make cities that are able to understand how to create the greatest sort of edifying impact on our communities. And one of those is to not sit in a vehicle for 2 hours or 3 hours trying to get from A to B, to just go punch a computer or talk to your pal, about an idea. It's got to be a little bit more fulfilling than reducing life. And, a lot of the 20th century, a lot of people's lives were reduced to just commuting between places and families being disconnected. That is something that has to be changed. And I think that that's the basis of the urgency of this idea of a mixed-use city, a city that is about what I think the agglomerating of villages together to create wholes.
Mm-hmm. Dubai is still predominantly an individual vehicle city, but Marco, for somewhere like London, we've seen big things like congestion tax. It's a lot more difficult, a lot more expensive to drive through the city of London these days. What work have you been doing in terms of, focusing on a carbon neutral zone, reducing this traffic congestion, and these ideals of a 15-minute city where we're not seeing the vehicles?
Well, I think when it comes to mobility related to our buildings, we now look more and more into aligning them and preparing them also for alternative mobility models. In London, cycling is becoming more and more important, knowing that this will also not work for every region in the world. I've lived in Shanghai, where you won't want to cycle in the peak summer period because it's simply too humid. But there are alternatives such as the electric vehicles, which we'll see more and more, public transport. And I think the key is that our buildings are really supporting that. So we have now looked even into whether you can have a drone airport, for example, on the roof of your building, because that potentially could be a solution in the future. to come from the airport to the city center with an electric drone. So this is something we currently discuss. Of course, there will be a very long way to achieve such extreme mobility scenarios. But I think that's also what we need to talk about and discuss, because mobility will look different in 20, 30 years. And our buildings need to support that. I think it would be not good if the buildings then are not compatible with those models, because what we build today will be there for the next 50, 60 years. And that's a very, very long time horizon. So we can't really predict actually what we will see in 30 to 50 years.
Well, I am going to ask you a bit later about what you think we can predict in 30 or 40 years' time. But Stefan, I want to bring you in here, obviously being from the Netherlands, public transport and mobility around town is already a little bit different. What do you see the future of the 15-minute city looking like?
Well, referring to the Netherlands, myself, I could get rid of my car, and I'm doing car sharing. It's fantastic, I can recommend. The cycle use is, of course, quite intense. So the range, the radius of a 15-minute city is a bit larger than average, than a walkable city, perhaps. Then, how I'm seeing it is, it reminds me of an exercise we did with the city of Bangkok, where maybe similarities to here in Dubai is you find a lot of malls because it's quite convenient to escape from the weather at some times. But a mall is always seen as a destination mainly. And what was interesting to see is that we try to make a network of retail experience, almost like a retail infrastructure. So can you think of a city that is maybe air conditioned in a sustainable way, of course, but that's convenient to stay. So I think it is too idealistic to say we will all walk and cycle through any climate, but there are maybe other means of organizing our cities.
Mm-hmm. Kourosh, what are your thoughts in terms of the policies that companies or governments are now putting in place to reduce their carbon footprint, to put sustainability at the forefront of how they create buildings today? Are we seeing real change? Is it a lot of talk, not a lot of action? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I wish you hadn't asked me this question because I'm getting old and very cynical. I don't trust companies because I fundamentally believe quite a lot of them have, despite their rhetoric, they have a different agenda. And just to coin a recent phrase at the COP Summit, blah, 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 is very much forefront. I think those of us who are lucky enough to be able to sort of get on public platforms and have a voice, or try to be a voice for some people, not everyone obviously, I think we need to sort of reassess the whole notion of how we continue to grow. I mean, I was interested in what David was saying about sort of the notion of sort of re-understanding the notion of a community and integrating it. Western society is sort of started by sort of promoting the notion of, or the culture of the individual, very much so. And then, and the sprawl and the possessions and everything became a part of a mantra of growth and notion of success. That in itself has had repercussions in a way that we've become more alienated and grown far apart. And then the cookie-cutter cities that are now, for instance, are emerging in some of the sort of post-industrial countries like China are a great example of that. We cannot continue. That formula doesn't work any longer, and we really need to reassess. I think it has to be done at a political and community level. Companies are usually followers rather than leaders because they go what the customer wants them to go. And I think it's for us to change the debate. Sorry, I hope this doesn't sound too cynical.
Which companies do you think are getting it right?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't spend my time thinking about companies. No, I think about some great individuals and communities who are doing great work. In this region, for instance, I always say that, we had the great Egyptian thinker, Hassan Fathi, in the 1920s, 1930s, that he was thinking about sustainable cities in a way that he thought, he was building for the poorest of the poor. And he sort of introduced the notion that these places have to be built by those people, be sustained by them, repaired by them, and they should be able to afford it and understand the technology, etc. Now, to me, that is a thinking that we need to sort of look into a lot more than forever look at companies or even political leaders as such to show us the way. Sorry.
I think you were the perfect person for that question. I don't think anyone could have said it better.
All right, a few more questions I want to ask you, but I'd love to open it up to the audience. Do you have any questions for our panelists today? We've got an incredible lineup of speakers here. If anyone would like to ask a question, please do come and approach the microphone. Otherwise, I've got plenty more to ask all of you. But do we have any questions this afternoon?
On the right here.
Oh, great, ma'am. I'm just going to get you to approach the microphone in the middle, if you don't mind. And I'll ask you to say your name and what company you're from, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much to all the presenters for their insights. I am Anna Jones, and I represent the Finland Futures Research Center. I am inside education and research, not so much into companies, which might be a good thing, given what it was said. My question to you all is, and I have to say that I agree with something that was said about sustainability. Sustainability being a great term nowadays that nobody seems to understand, but we all relate to. And I think if we look at architecture and how cities and civilizations have evolved, sustainability has always been there. Sustainability is not a new concept. It's only that we have moved very far away from it, and we had to revisit it. But that being said, my question to you all is, what do you think is the biggest learning that this COVID-19 pandemic has given architecture and development to take away and implement for the future of all? Thank you.
Who would like to take that?
Sure. Thank you for your great question. I think COVID has taught us all about our overdependence on certain fundamentals that the 20th century produced. I think you actually said something very important, which was that actually until the kind of explosion of people, which happened at the beginning of the 19th century, actually most cities were incredibly sustainable. It was about flexibility of typologies. It was about certain material uses that were localized. There was a kind of incredible, all the kind of buzzwords were actually normal words, circular, economies, people living with each other, children growing with, the house, etc. All this was happening. And then the 20th century happened, and we had this incredible explosion of, industrialization, essentially. We industrialized at a kind of fast rate at one point, what I call version 1. And version 1 was about profit, I think, and products. And I think that what we're now in is version 2, which is that, okay, we can make a lot of things very fast and we can extract out of the world. How do we actually now do that in a responsible way that creates that return back to the return of the carbon rather than releasing it into the world? And I think that COVID has taught us that if we don't get on with that, it could have profound impact on our planet and our civilization. We just cannot anymore, just because we can consume, we cannot anymore just consume. And COVID has taught us that. So, the breaks that are happening are to do with, well, imagine if we had another type of pandemic, and this is, some scientists say this was a light a light touch of, of what is completely possible, depending on how crazy this sort of warming up of the planet is. So imagine the kind of possibilities of getting to a place where, we have to really radically, absolutely radically rethink what the city is. What if we have to abandon the city as we've created it? And I think that's what anybody who's really thinking is starting to notice, that the kind of assumptions that we're making about how we all live can actually be disrupted in a kind of blink of an eye by a system that kind of, really disrupts our ecology. And I think that that's really at the heart of what all this is about, that industry has to change. We have to shift to a different world. It is going to cost a ton of money because we've created an industry that is worth a ton of money. And so that's going to have to kind of flip. But that's our responsibility as citizens who've created this thing. Otherwise, we are just literally heading to the cliff. So I think that for me, the lessons are just very clear. I think that, up to COVID, clients and some companies could be dismissive even of the issue. But I think now it's no longer, what I love about it for our industry is that you don't have to stress it anymore. This idea of pushing for material thinking that is actually much more about new technologies that are much more smart, about new ways of looking at how we organize our spaces, the work that you're doing, Dicky, in London. These are now on the table when they were actually really hard to talk about 5 years ago. You needed a Google to talk about those issues, whereas actually it should be in every workplace. It shouldn't be a radical idea. It's not.
Yeah, I think for me, it's almost that COVID pressed the fast forward button on so many issues. And the basic one is our respect for what is our shelter. The built form is our shelter. It's where we live, it's where we work, and sometimes where we travel. So it's been a real insight into how, as David says, even with some of our most scrupulous and commercial clients, they've started to respect some of these standards and understand potentially the impact of office space on mental health and trying to attract people to want to come back to the office. And then even within the residential sector, some clients saying, well, let's improve the space standards because more than likely people might be working from home, so let's make actually the accommodation for that space. And I think it's actually, there's been a lot of positives from quite a dire situation.
Mm-hmm. Stefan or Kourosh, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, it also makes me wonder, being from the Netherlands, where land is scarce and there's a high dense population, people tend to now, post-COVID, tend to return to the rural areas because they don't see the necessity anymore to travel to work. Which is at one hand fantastic, and it makes you rethink the rural way of life and the city way of life. At the same time, I'm thinking, okay, but there's also something very sustainable about a city, about this high density, and I can't get my head around it, like what that future city should be. Well, where the city of Amsterdam has decided to expand only within the boundaries of the current boundaries of the city. And then, so it should triple in size on the same footprint. And that's an interesting quest. I hope it leads to still quality of life as well, and livable environments, and so on.
Can I add to that?
Please.
I think that what we mustn't have is a knee-jerk reaction to mass suburbanization, which is, oh my God, if we're all together and there's a problem, we should all just go live, in the suburbs. And I think that would be a disaster, another ecological disaster. But I think that, the reason the attraction to the countryside is so profound now is because it simply is the most expedient way of dealing with the immediate situation. But it really gives a window into what is deficient within the idea of the city, which has become relentlessly, I think, cruel. The city at the end of the 20th century has become very cruel to the most. If you're not wealthy, the city is very, very hard. And actually all you get to do in it is to work and leave. And I think that we should really take stock of that. We produce a city that basically is cruel to most of its citizens. And we need to make a city which is generous to its citizens and encourages its citizens to make ecologies and microcosms that are sustainable for the edification of human beings. That's the whole bloody point of this thing. And we keep forgetting and keep going off into sort of efficiencies and things that really take us down paths that are really, right? Sorry.
Can I just interrupt? I was just going to say, I love that ideal, but how realistic is that in real terms? Yesterday, we were talking a little bit about Dubai Marina, for example.
Completely ideal.
And there was a speaker from the audience, and they were saying, you know, Dubai Marina, incredible part of Dubai, but it's now very built up. There's no green spaces. Sure, you have these incredible waterfront views, but there's so many buildings, there's not those green spaces. So then how do you go to municipalities, to governments, and say, you need green space to make people happier, when at the end of the day, it's also about balancing a budget?
I think that it's, you know, we made the code. It's not, and I think the way that people look at the way in which laws and constructions of laws are made is that we think that they're immovable. They're not. Yeah. If you decide that the waterfront is accessible for everyone, if you decide that you build and a certain percentage has to go towards creating certain kinds of, you know, benefit, if you gain and you have to then contribute, and we just start doing it, we can very quickly change the world around within 1 century. I mean, we can massively transform it. It's not going to happen at a click of a button, but it's definitely going to get better. If every new development starts to do this, we are producing so much as a construction industry that it's completely within our realm, our grasp. Look at what's happened with cities in Asia. 25 years to build whole cities. So why can't we in 25 years change the cities that we've created that are cruel?
Sorry, Stefan, I interrupted you.
No, not at all. It's going well.
I'd like to add, I think let's just go back to the question, but some great answers, by the way. This is a big subject and probably won't be covered in a few minutes of a chat. But I think the notion of cities are historically there to protect. They are at the forefront of conflict, if you like. You know, they're there to protect us against floods, against enemy attacks. They are there to protect us. Just think of a fortress. They're there to sort of keep a community safe and together. And again, I'm fully with you that how some cities have become quite aggressive and alienating places. But in some other sort of notion that urbanists have argued for densification, again, as Stefan says, on the basis that density is more sustainable. You know, you build one cinema and a lot of people get to use it or walk to it. If you have something where in sort of notion of American towns, out of towns, where you sort of have to drive for 2 hours sometimes, things are beginning to change, but even there are parts of the LA that you literally have to drive for 2 hours to go to a Chinese restaurant or something. So I think that in itself, that sprawl is no longer sustainable. So the notion of city, it sort of reinvents, and when we constantly have to reevaluate our connection back to the city, and what is it that we're expecting from it. I could go on, but I better not. So.
I think learning from other cities as well has been a really important part, and as a whole world, I think we can do that, even though we're in a different climate here in Dubai. We had a talk earlier from David on the legacy of what Expo 2020 will be. And it's really exciting to look at Dubai, actually looking at the European city and the European way of life into the legacy of what Expo site will be, and how can it be pedestrianised and introduce e-scooters and cycles. And that's something that we've been doing as well in our sustainability outlook, and looking at countries like Germany and Finland, specifically bringing those principles back to the UK. It almost feels like cheating because they're so far ahead, and you know, why not take these ideas from them and cheat a little bit? And yes, you have to adapt them, but if we all are working together and actually introducing these ideals into each climate, then I think we can make a lot of progress quite quickly.
Absolutely, I think that's definitely one of the goals here of Expo, being able to have this sharing knowledge economy, you know, looking at somewhere like Singapore. If you haven't seen their pavilion here, they have these beautiful green hanging gardens, and they have these little robots climbing up the gardens and looking at how we can make spaces in the city green, even when we run out of space. Do we have any more questions in the audience? Is anyone feeling brave this afternoon? Otherwise, we've still got lots more to talk about. I'd be interested to hear from each of our panelists up here, you know, bearing in mind everything we've talked about today, what do you see the future of cities looking like today?
Should we let Marco go?
Yeah, Marco, do you want to jump in? What do we see the future of cities looking like today?
Well, I mean, let me maybe focus on the circular economy bit, because what we see currently that the building itself is, I think, not only a shelter anymore for many of our clients, for our developers and investors, it's actually an investment, right? That's why I think the entire topic of sustainability needs to have somehow a good business case. You have mentioned 7 billion cost to reach the COP26 target, I think, from the Collier studies. So it will cost money, but there are also opportunities. So what we see is that buildings are also a material depot. That means that if we design it in a way that we can store raw materials in it, that we can disassemble it at the end of lifetime. When the building reaches the end of life point, we could resell the parts, we could take out all the copper, we could take out the steel and other raw materials and use them for a second life in the new building. That's where we see the future. And then I think also the business case of a building looks different, because I can sell commodities at the end. So it's not only an investment in real estate, it's also an investment in raw materials. And that, I think, is also really the key how we need to see buildings and cities in the future. We need to be able to put a financial value on the environmental and the social factors if we want to talk about ESG. And if we are able to really quantify and do that, then I think it will also bring a lot of return to the cost we might need to invest right now.
Dicky, what are your thoughts?
I'm really excited about the city potentially being the answer to a lot of these issues in terms of sustainability and densification, and how we actually approach some of these topics that we're struggling with. And we have this responsibility to react to the climate change. And obviously I might be biased as an architect, but I think, you know, the built form is one of the most important ways that we can respond to this. I might be reiterating what Marco says, but in terms of the idea of the building can be reassembled, disassembled, so that buildings can almost be a marketplace for deconstruction and reconstruction. As an architect, we usually start with Lego as our first inspiration. But I love the idea that actually Lego is this thing that handed down generation to generation, and it's something that's actually in itself inherently quite sustainable. And that combined with them recently finding the perfect plastic to use as a plant-based option for the Lego is almost a great story of how you can improve these things, and potentially this is what we can do with building materials and respond to this climate change.
Oh, I love that idea. Kourosh, what are your thoughts?
Can I pass on this one? Future of the cities. We're doing research on cities, and we sort of do articles and educational talks on it. And it's sort of the actual notion, I feel it sort of is is changing, and it actually changes in different parts of the world. But it's actually, the cities are going through a sort of reinvention themselves, and no one city is alike. I mean, whilst in terms of size, you could perhaps say London, being a vast sort of, city of complex networks and so on, could be comparable, let's say, to Istanbul in some cases. But you couldn't find, two cities more different. One is that London is a highly regulated city, and we could comfortably, as architects or practitioners, talk about a sort of a series of games and rules that are pretty well defined. You go into some large cities of the world, whether South America or whatever, it's anyone's game. And no matter how many coffee shops we sit and how many platforms we sort of go on and talk about sort of, sustainability and community and so on, those cities have their own dynamics. And it's actually really hard to control and govern, if you like. So I think being formulaic, you're saying that, we try to avoid cliches, but a lot of the times that, by providing recipes, we're actually sort of pandering to that sort of the cliche of definition and oversimplification. Cities are complex, and they will have their own dynamics, and their growth is very much dependent on its, the vision of these, the inhabitants, but they are a necessity. And like we said, they are there to protect and guide and provide human sort of functioning communities. So they are very precious things and should be treated with respect and not dismissed.
That is a fair point. I take that on board. I guess it's, with more than half of the world's population currently based in a city, and that's only going to increase in decades to come. I guess it's about, maybe the changes that we need to make to ensure that we are sustainable. Earlier, so David, you were talking a little bit about whether we'd have to move out of cities if it is no longer sustainable. Marco, what are your thoughts in terms of the, actually, sorry, did we ask you that earlier? Did I ask you that earlier about the future of what the future of cities will look like? I think we did cover that with you. Sorry, Stefan, I'm going to bring you in here. What do you see? As I said, we look at some of your designs. I don't know if we can bring any of Stefan's designs up on the slides again, and to me, they just seem so incredibly futuristic and sleek and chic and really inspiring. But where do you see the future of cities taking us?
Well, I think when we talk about sustainability and about optimizing sources, for example, and have circular materialization and so on, I think there's also a risk of becoming quite generic, and this is also what you see in the development of archetypes nowadays. I think as an office, what we try to do is not that we want to be unique, but to look specifically on, let's say, the context you're building in. And if you then think about the future, I'm quite intrigued. What I will take away from today is David's explaining about the value of maybe what we know from villages or communities. Makes me think about maybe the future is in how we deal with what is the meaning of mixed use. Mixed use is perhaps not only mixing functions and also, of course, they have to be adaptive because we're living in a more and more fast changing world. That's also what we take out of the pandemic, that office environments change, housing environments change. So the buildings need to become more adaptive, but also we've learned, I think, that we live more locally because we couldn't leave the house. Yeah. And in that sense, you get in contact with your local suppliers and not anymore with the supermarket, perhaps. And so you build another community. And in that sense, we as architects, what we can do is we can facilitate in our placemaking, in our zoning and addressing this to help maybe change for the better, as we think. Yeah.
We hope so. Final thoughts with you, Sir David.
Okay, so I'll bring it back to big picture and end on that. I mean, I think that, here we are on the precipice of the fourth industrial revolution. We are retooling this, this sort of, this third industrial revolution. We're retooling that, and we're understanding that we can't have a sort of that kind of world. In the end, what is the city when we kind of produce so many people on the planet? Well, in the end, the reason we all want to be in the city is to have a fulfilled life, right? I mean, in the end, we've constructed this thing called the city, which is the theatrical backdrop to make us happy. That's basically what it is. We've sort of moved out of nature and we've moved into the city, and that's the backdrop that fulfills our lives and gives us a reason for living. So I really pray, and I use that word very profoundly, that we start to learn how to produce cities which are not just the sum of facts, but places that start to really contribute to fulfilling the lives of future generations, to give a kind of, to use the old word, to bring a sense of fulfillment to life is what the city's real intention is. So it's not a small thing, but I think that that's the beauty of what was created 10,000 years ago. This idea of creating a place for us to come together and to fulfill this idea of life, to leave it on that high note. All right.
To create that human connection, isn't it, that we're all about? Certainly it's one thing that Dubai is trying to do. We've been talking a bit about the Dubai Vision 2040 and the fact they are doubling green spaces here. There's going to be a lot fewer vehicles. We're going to have a lot better access to public transport. And the expo site itself, 80% of the expo site is being turned into a smart city of the future. Very inspiring. Well, look, thank you all of us for thank you to all of you for joining us today. Really appreciate your thoughts, from very different viewpoints as well. And I appreciate you taking time out for us. Marco, very big thank you to joining us online as well. Thank you very much for your time.